What's up, Game Boys and Girls? Big T here, back with another video. And yes, as the title suggests, it's not a troll, it's how I really feel. And I'll explain why. Why Nintendo and its fans are just the best. And obviously I'm a little bit biased here. And this is not to diss other fans, not really. But it's just to explain why I think for the industry, and when I'm talking about best, I'm talking about for gaming, for the industry, why I feel like Nintendo and its fans are the best. Now, okay, you've seen recently with multitudes of layoffs and studios closing and all that stuff. You know, you've seen it happen over everywhere, and it happens to everybody. But I feel like, especially in gaming, that it never happens to the scale that it happens to everybody else, the way it happens to Nintendo. You never really hear about huge layoffs when it comes to Nintendo. Weird shakeups and, you know, oh, this guy's retiring, but you kind of feel like, no, they're not retiring. They're kind of being pushed out, like what's happening with Jim Ryan. And I had some conversation. Well, I don't want to say conversation, but somebody in one of my comments sections when I did the video on Jim Ryan and my theory about him being pushed out, they went into this whole diatribe, and I'm like, you're not paying attention. Either you're not paying attention, you're lying, or you're not. You're lying to me, or you're lying to yourself. I don't know which one of those it is. But, you know, the more and more comes out, you realize, because let's talk about Sean Layden at Sony, when he was let go, I mean, it was so disjointed that you knew something was up, and it was really quick and swift, and there wasn't really much talk about it. It felt like he got pushed out. Now, subsequently, you know, years afterwards, there's been talks about, you know, how he was escorted from the building. He was escorted from Sony's building, as if they were worried about him causing some kind of ruckus, like he had done something horrible. And I thought PlayStation 4's era was one of the most lucrative and best eras in PlayStation's history. And so that happened, right? And, you know, there were some other shakeups within the company. I can't remember exactly right now, but I know some other people got laid off at that point, and they were said to be leaving the company. And they're under NDA, so they can't really talk about it. There's also non-compete, where they can't go and get a job with a similar situation that they were in, which is just the weirdest thing, and shouldn't be a thing. It should be illegal, but it happens. And then you have, you know, later on, what happened with Jim Ryan. Now, here's the thing about Sean, like, because people were saying, or this guy was saying to me that, oh, it can't be this, it can't be that. He's retiring. You know, it's like, okay. Well, Sean Layden was fairly young for a CEO. So you're going to get rid of him to get an old guy like who's not going to be doing the job for very long? Why would you cause that kind of shakeup? Why would you cause that kind of uncertainty in the future of the company? You get a guy who's 59 years old. He was 59 at the time. That is Jim Ryan was 59 at the time he took over for what Sean Layden was doing. And I'm like, why would you go get an older dude to take this job? Clearly there's something up here. And so now you have Jim Ryan retiring because he didn't realize he was going to be flying a lot. I mean, it just makes no sense. He didn't realize that he was going to be flying a lot as the CEO of Sony SCEA. Like, how do you not know that? You're not going to be chilling at home the way you were when you were the head of the European division. Clearly, you're going to have to be in US a lot. You would know these things. I'm sure they talked to you about this before you took the job. So it never made any sense to me that, oh, that's why he left. It was too tiring for him. No, he was definitely pushed out. And it was, you know, the timing was right after Microsoft acquired ABK. Because initially he had said, I have to get this backstory before I get to the Nintendo stuff. He initially said of the ABK acquisition, he wasn't worried about it. Microsoft, he kind of joked about it. Why would they spend all that money? This is not about, you know, taking stuff away from, like, specifically Call of Duty. He wasn't worried about that. And then later on, all of a sudden, he goes on this freaking tirade and this crusade. He's flying all over the place. He doesn't like flying. He's flying all over the map to help get these regulators to not let this happen, right? And I'm like, wait a minute, I thought you were cool with this. And so he made it kind of his thing. This was the defining moment for him. If he didn't stop this deal from going through, it would look really bad on him after all the things he was saying, how terrible it would be for Sony. Oh, Sony would have to foreclose, basically, if ABK was given to Microsoft, was allowed to be sold to Microsoft. And he went through all this, and he just made everybody look bad. He made Sony developers look bad. Oh, we can't compete. There's nothing we can do against Call of Duty. Basically our developers have no chance of competing against Call of Duty. There's nothing we can do, and the company would just fall apart without this third-party game. And it's just like he went on. So he was thrown in the kitchen sink. He was throwing everything to make this thing not go through, and then boom, it went through, which is something I said it would do from the beginning. But it went through, and that looked really bad on him. And I'm like, he bet his career on this. And a little bit later, all of a sudden, he's retiring because he doesn't like flying too much, and he wants to spend time with his family. That was BS. All right, and I still think that. And there's nothing that has come out that is, there's nothing come out of that has been official that speaks differently, but that's kind of a theory that a lot of people think is happening, and I totally think that's what happened, that he got pushed out because he failed to stop this deal. And all of a sudden, his thing was, let's get these new games, let's get these games as a service games through. This is our future. He 60-40 of the 60 to 40% of the new games that Sony was working on were games as a service games. They put up like 10 games that they're trying to push through. And a lot of the teams did not like this, from the chatter behind the scenes. A lot of teams at Sony didn't like this. They want to continue doing what they do best, which is single player story driven games. That's what they do best. And they didn't like this whole change. And so, once, that situation happened, there's talks about studios being disgruntled. And, I can't remember her name right now. I should have looked this up, but I didn't think I'd go this way. Connie Barr, something like that, who has been a lead person in a lot of games at Sony for like 24 years or something. She was recently basically fired. I mean, again, nothing official has come out, but she was a big part of kind of the new direction, and she was like the middle person trying to get these teams to make these games as a service games. And, I guess it didn't really go well. And you had stuff like the Factions game, Last of Us Factions solo game that's supposed to be like a games as a service multiplayer game that is on ice because whatchamacallit didn't like it. Bungie didn't like it. They didn't think it was good. There's just all this nonsense that's going on behind the scenes when it comes to Sony. And I think about that, and I think about Nintendo, and I'm like, you never hear about crazy layoffs from Nintendo or weird firings or any of that stuff. Reggie retired. There was no conflict. There was no guesses or disputes that he just was done. He's been there a while and he wanted to go. It was his time, he felt. And I'll talk about that in another video about basically Nintendo of America and what they are. But you just never hear about that, right? Because first of all, the stakes aren't as high when it comes to Nintendo games. They don't spend oodles and noodles of billions, hundreds of millions of dollars to produce a game. So their overhead is nowhere near what a Microsoft or a Sony is, specifically Sony, because they're the ones who really do the whole cinematic experience type games. And they put a lot of money into it, and they are a media company, so they do a lot of really good marketing for their games. They have movie studios, and they have television and all that kind of stuff. So they're really good at that kind of stuff. And so they put a lot of money and finances into that stuff. Whereas Nintendo, it's about the games first. They don't we have to have movie visual effects and graphics in our game. They don't do that. And you know, they kind of tried or kind of started going to that idea during the N64. If you look at a lot of N64 games, even like Ocarina of Time, where it's like, oh, cinematic experience, and because that was the buzzword in those days, where you know it became HD, and then it became like 4K and all that kind of stuff. But back then it was like cinematic experience, because video games really wanted to be a medium like movies were, and so that was a buzzword. But you look at stuff like with Sony, where they shutter Japan Studio, and they're now laying off a lot of people at Media Molecule, the guys who did the Dreams game. I think they did. There's another game that was kind of big. Oh, they did Little Big Planet stuff, right? And you look at them and you think that those are good games. Those are really good games, and they just can't seem to find an audience when it comes to Sega or Sony. They can't seem to find an audience when it comes to Sony and Sony's fan base, because they've unfortunately cultivated their fan base on these cinematic movie experiences, third person, over the shoulder, sad dad action adventure games. And when they do something like really clever and cool and fun, like a what's the robot game? I can't think of the little robot game. There's a couple of them. I don't know. I can never remember the name of these games. It's one of my favorite VR games. But they have, you know, the little that was made by Japan Studio, who is gone at this point. So they don't have an audience that would look to those games. But Nintendo fans, this is the cool thing about Nintendo fans. We also like the cinematic movie experience games, but we also really like those cool, quirky side games, those AA games. We are probably the biggest AA gaming fans out there. Nintendo fans are. Because we've been cultivated by Nintendo to also care about those games. Nintendo first party makes the AAA game, which again is not as expensive and oogly boogly graphic-y as a so-called AAA game experience in the rest of the industry. But they also emphasize and make important those AA games, you know. Let's see, like Kirby and the Forgotten Land. I wouldn't necessarily call that even a Nintendo AAA, but it is a Nintendo AA game, and fans flock to it like it's a AAA, because we don't really, as Nintendo fans, we don't really separate those games the way other fan bases do. Like, you know, indie games and whatnot, we see them all equally, almost equally in the same light for the most part, you know. I hear all the time my fellow Nintendo fans talk about something like, oh my God, what's the game? The Silk Song, the main game. Games like those, they were like, oh man, you know, we will put 50, 60, 70 hours in those games. We talk about how, man, that is a full price game to us. We would happily spend full price for these experiences, because we feel like they can be put up next to the so-called industry AAA games. Because again, we've been cultivated, and our, you know, the game company that we like never left what they always did good in the beginning. Like Nintendo is about Mario and about Zelda and Metroid and whatnot, and they've never really left those experiences saying, oh, we have to move into the mature, we have to move into these big crazy cinematic experience games and leave that stuff behind. That's one of the reasons I'm not big on Sony really anymore, because they don't make the stuff, or at least produce or fund the stuff that they used to do on the PS1 and even the PS2. Once the PS3 came around, it was all about the big cinematic experience games like Uncharted and Last of Us. And they left behind your Ape Escapes and your well, I guess they didn't never really own those games. Activision ended up really owning them, like this Ratchet and Clanks. But they had Sly Coopers and well, Ratchet and Clank. I said Ratchet and Clank. I meant to say Spyro the Dragon. They don't emphasize those games as much. I think they tried to with, again, Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. They really marketed that game. You know, it was all about the magical SSD with that game, and it was a lot of pomp and circumstance and a lot of talk from Sony fanboys and how, you know, amazing. And that game comes out and it barely sells. I think it didn't even hit 2 million sales yet. Maybe it has now since it's on PC, but I know, you know, for the longest time it was, you know, just over 1 million on PS5, and it's just like, what, those guys just don't really care about those types of games, the mascot type of games or the AA games. They don't really see them as games they need to run out there for. And that's why Sony has stopped really making those games, but it's partially their fault because they stopped cultivating their fans on stuff like that. And that's kind of why I've kind of drifted away from Sony consoles or caring as much. But that's what makes the Nintendo, because almost every Nintendo fan I know, 97% of the Nintendo fans I know have another console, where it's either an Xbox or a PlayStation 5 or both, and they play all these other types of games as well as their Nintendo games, right? But you go to the other sides, and Xbox dudes, most of them, usually just stick to Xbox. And they kind of look down on Nintendo. And same with the PlayStation guys. They mostly stick. Sometimes they'll interchange because they feel like they have to buy the console they hate in order to you know, criticize it. So they'll buy an Xbox, the Sony guys, sometimes to criticize it, and they'll have Game Pass sometimes they'll go to criticize it, and vice versa. So the Xbox guys, I think a lot of Xbox guys do like the Sony games, the Sony first party stuff. You know, they like the Spider-Mans and they like the Uncharted and stuff like that. But for the most part, they kind of stick to their. And it's funny because they always talk about Nintendo fans staying in our own lane. We're the ones who like to go in all the lanes. You know, for the most part, you guys are the ones who pretty much stick to your own lane and don't really play stuff that we would consider AA or Nintendo style games. You guys don't do that, which means we are better for the industry because we also support those games that you guys look down on. You guys will use those games to make the other fan base, you know, the Sony fan base or vice versa, the Xbox fan base, look bad. Haha, look at that trash that you guys get, you know. Especially because Xbox is now starting to do more AA type stuff. You get stuff like Hi-Fi Rush and whatnot. And, you know, Sony guys try to look down on that stuff. And I'm like, see, this is the problem. This is why we don't get nice things. Because you guys don't go out and support AA games. Whereas a Nintendo fan does, and we also support the AAA games in the industry as well as AAA Nintendo games. So that's why I feel like we're the best, you know, when it comes to the industry. Every fan base has its, you know, psychos who go way too far and are way too invested in a company, a corporation. But I think for the industry, the Nintendo fan is the best because we will spend our money. We'll spread our money everywhere. Whereas some of those guys don't. They stick to their little corner. They stick to their factions. And that's it. So that's how I feel. That's my opinion. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Do you think I'm off base here? Again, Nintendo knows how to stretch their dollar. They know how to produce and, you know, create games that are compelling, that are highly acclimated, you know, and they continue to do that in this era of like exorbitant, like game budgets, and they're able to do that and captivate their fan base in the tens of millions and sell that much for games that the rest of the industry would consider double A, because they overly rely on pomp and circumstance. They overly rely on visuals and storytelling and whatnot, which wasn't what gaming started as. And Nintendo was really good at continuing to make the essence of gaming. When it started, they continue to be able to make games that are compelling, regardless of the era. That same philosophy still holds true, and their fans, us guys and gals, we still flock to their games. There's a reason for that, and I know other fan bases want to be dismissive, because they don't know how to deal with it. They don't know how to challenge it, other than to say, "Oh, Nintendo." It's just because Nintendo, they get the high scores and whatnot, just because it's Nintendo, as if that means something. Like that means nothing in itself. It's because they make excellent games, but they don't know how to deal with what Nintendo is doing, what Nintendo has always done. They don't know how to deal with it. They don't know how to combat it, and it's just they get frustrated, and you can see it in their face and their commentary, and it's just like, you guys just are so overwhelmed with visuals and frame rates and all this stuff, that is, important to games, but it's not the most important thing. But you're overly reliant on that stuff. You overly care about that stuff, and so you don't even understand how Nintendo is able to do what they do. Sell tens of millions of copies of a 2D side-scrolling game where a guy jumps, because that's all you see is a 2D side-scrolling game where a guy jumps. You're missing the boat, unfortunately. But again, you've been cultivated by your favorite company to not have, respect for the type of games that Nintendo makes and companies influenced by Nintendo make. So it's unfortunate, but that's my observation. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thank you again for watching and listening, and now see you fools next time. Peace out.